Welcome to the first tutorial video for AudioGL. On this YouTube channel I'm going to be putting up a lot of tutorials over the next little while, basically covering topics all the way from just getting started with synthesis and then moving into more advanced topics like how to make larger synthesizer networks and also how to create entire tracks using this software. So in this video I'm just going to focus on getting the program set up and just how to do basic navigation and then the various modes that are included in the program. Alright, so first of all let's focus on just getting it set up. To do this you want to go to the File button in the top left corner and click on Preferences. You could also get into this menu just by hitting the F9 button. And when you're in here, what you can see is that we have audio drivers and we also have MIDI inputs. So if you have a MIDI keyboard attached, you can just click on it to enable. In Windows, sometimes MIDI keyboards are listed twice, so if yours is listed twice, make sure that you only select it once. Otherwise, you're going to be sending the same input to the computer twice, which is not a good idea. Alright. On the left side we have the choice of direct sound and ASIO audio drivers. I highly recommend that you set up an ASIO driver. If you're not familiar with ASIO, what it is sort of a low latency system which is designed for professional audio programs. You can either get an ASIO compatible audio interface, or you could get a driver called ASIO for All, which is compatible with most generic sound cards, and that includes the integrated cards that come along with most laptops. So you can download that, see if it works with your sound card, and it's going to give you lower latencies, and it's also going to make the program run just a little bit smoother. Okay? Now there is more stuff in here, but I don't need to cover that right now. To just get started, all you need to set up is this stuff. Alright? So let's move on to the rest of it. Navigation. Navigation in AudioGL is pretty straightforward. The best way to zoom in and zoom out is to have a mouse with a scroll wheel on it. Okay. There are alternative ways to do it. You could hit plus or minus on your keyboard, or you could use this menu in the top left corner. The key bindings for this menu are Q, W, E, and R. Alright? With Q being the farthest zoom level, this zoom level will always show you your entire project. So it zooms out a different amount depending upon how big your project is. Okay, the next zoom level is W. This is a little bit closer, but still zoomed out a little bit. And the next zoom level is E. This is the one-to-one zoom level, and this is where you're probably going to be doing most of your work. The interface is considered centered when you hit E. And if you hit R, then you're zoomed in just a little bit more, and this is a good view mode just for doing more precise editing. Alright, so how I usually navigate is I zoom out, I move around, and then I hit E just to zoom back in. It's a good way to move from one side of the project to another. Alright, for moving the project around, you just hold down your right mouse button and move the mouse. Very straightforward. And the last thing is just rotation. To rotate the program, you just hold down your middle mouse button and move it a little bit, and now the program has been switched into the 3D view. So the next time I hold down my middle mouse button and move it, you can see that now we start doing an actual rotation. Okay? To switch back to 2 dimensions or orthographic, you just click on this button up here. Alright? And the key binding for this button is number 2. That's pretty much everything for navigation. The only other thing that I can mention is that if you happen to lose your project and you can't find it, you can just hit the home key and it'll come back. There we go. Alright, so the different modes. AudioGL has 5 modes. There is instrument mode, module mode, parameter mode, modulation mode, and edit page mode. You can use this menu to access them, or you can just use the key bindings A, S, D, F, G. Alright, and the next thing is this ribbon bar right over here. Now this ribbon bar is different depending upon which mode you're in. So you can see that as I switch between modes, these icons are all shuffling around. So what you can do is, right now I'm in instrument mode, so let's demonstrate this. The first slot is just a selection cursor. The next slot is a draw tool. I can use this to create new instruments. And the fourth slot is an erase tool, so I can use that to delete instruments. But what you can do if you want to work a little bit faster is just think of this as 4 separate slots where each one has its own key binding. So the first one is the left mouse button, the second one is Control left mouse button, and the third one is Alt left mouse button, and the fourth one is Control Alt left mouse button. Alright, and that idea is followed through the entire program. If you hold Control Alt and click on something, then it will get deleted. Alright, so now that you have the program set up and you know a little bit about navigation, let's focus on actually using the software. Now essentially AudioGL has the 5 modes, as I've already mentioned, and the idea is that using these modes you can construct any sort of synthesizer that you want to, and you can also start building sequences and patterns to control those synthesizers. Now, there is one different concept that I need to introduce you to, and that is the idea of a trigger-based instrument versus an automation-based instrument. Trigger-based instruments are essentially what you're already accustomed to. It is an instrument where you could enable it and then press a couple keys on a MIDI keyboard and play it back. Okay, so that's a good example of a trigger-based instrument. But this instrument over here in this track is a very good example of an instrument that is automation-based. Okay, if I move to the 3D view, what we can see is a whole bunch of automation inside of here. And if I were to try to do the same thing, enable it, and play my MIDI keyboard, what you'll find is that if I move the timeline around, the characteristic of this instrument is going to completely change. So let's try to find something else. Okay, so you can hear that I hit the note a few times and it made about 5 to 6 different sounds. This is again because of all of this automation inside of here. Whenever I move the timeline around, you're getting a completely different array of parameters, or the settings for these parameters are all changing. So that's why it sounds different, and that's why it's not really a traditional trigger-based instrument. Alright, so essentially a trigger-based instrument is going to focus on having envelopes inside of it. These envelopes are triggered every time you press a note. Okay. And automation-based instruments are going to be pretty easy to identify because you switch to parameter mode and there it is. There is a ton of automation. Alright, so let's move on to starting off with a basic template. I'm going to click on File and then New. Okay, and now what we have is an equalizer which is connected to an output module. Now the output module is in control of sending audio out to your speakers, so you're going to want to make sure that anytime you make a new instrument that it is somehow being routed to that output module. For example, let's create a few preset instruments. To create a preset instrument, you just switch to instrument mode and you click on it in this menu on the left and drag it into the main window, and then just click again to drop it down. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and make a couple of instruments. Like this one, that one, little subtractive synthesizer, and what else? I guess I'll make a little organ as well. There we go. Alright, now to connect these to the output, I want to go over to module mode, and I just want to find the output module for each instrument and then connect it to this equalizer. And I'll repeat this for each of these instruments. Alright, now they're all connected, and I'm going to cover how to give MIDI control to each of these instruments. There's a couple of ways to do it. One way is to be in instrument mode and to just click on the instrument. Okay. The other way is to either be in module mode or parameter mode, and then to just click on the sequencer. The currently enabled sequencer is going to have a little green dot on top of it. Okay, so it's pretty much the same idea, except that you have to go ahead and locate the sequencer yourself. Alright, so that's how you do that. And that's sort of the basis of module mode, but obviously there's a little bit more to it. If you want to move modules around, you can click on the middle of them. And if you want to spin them around, you can click on this outer ring and spin it. And you can also do that with multiple modules just by selecting them. Okay. And you also want to focus on these red rectangles that are being displayed when I'm moving stuff around. You want to make sure that those red rectangles do not intersect with one another, because when you switch to parameter mode, you can see that those rectangles contained all of the different parameters for that module. If they're overlapping, you're going to have a hard time editing stuff. Alright? The other thing to focus on with module mode is that it is where you control polyphony in the project. Polyphony is something that is a little bit different in AudioGL, so I'm going to cover it in a different tutorial video. But the main thing that you need to know is that you can show polyphony by clicking on this button. Alright? Whatever number is beside a module is going to tell you how many notes that module is capable of playing at one time. So these modules can obviously play 6 notes. Whereas this module down here can only play 1 note. So you would have to wonder, what's happening with this connection over here? Well, what's happening is that AudioGL automatically takes modules that are polyphonic, and when you connect them to a monophonic module, it takes all the separate voices and it sums them together into one channel. Okay, so it does this automatically, but you need to pay a little bit of attention to what you're doing when you create synthesizers. A monophonic module is a little bit easier to work with, but obviously there are benefits to polyphonic modules. The ability to play chords instead of just playing 1 note. Alright, again, I'll cover it in another tutorial. Let's move over to parameter mode. So in parameter mode, you're working with all of the individual parameters that are overlaid on top of a module. For example, alright, here's the general idea. Each module has its own overlay of settings. When you click on a setting, it's going to bring up this pop-up menu, which you can just hover the mouse over to activate. Each module has its own set of specific parameters. I'm not going to explain all of them right now, but most of them are written up in AudioGL's online manual, so go and check that out. Alright, the filter also has its own specific buttons, but the parameters have their own settings for each one. Alright, so for example, this parameter has a grid overlaid on top of it. If I want to use that grid, I'm going to turn on both the Y and the X buttons. And now this crosshair is being snapped directly to the grid, and that is giving me pure waveforms. If I turn both of these snaps off, you can see that it moves around more smoothly, but what I'm getting is a mixture of waveforms instead of just one pure waveform. Just to demonstrate the difference in sound, let me just rewire this oscillator so that it's being sent directly to the output. Okay, and I'm also just going to delete the rest of that instrument. Let's take a listen to this. Okay, so I enable the grid and we're going to get pure waveforms. Okay, and then the next parameter is octave, semitone, fine tuning. starting phase, frequency modulation, and then there's an analog parameter which detunes the oscillator by a random amount every time you play a note. So that's a basic overview of the oscillator and a basic overview of how parameter mode works. The other thing I can point out is that there are also parameters overlaid on top of connections. Now these control the volume of the audio flowing through that connection. And I need to turn this reverb off to demonstrate this. Now again, using this grid overlaid on top of here, if you want to turn that grid off, then that will enable panning control. If you were to turn the grid on in both directions, then you're not making any modification to the sound whatsoever. It is just flowing through, not being increased in volume and not being panned left or right. Okay? There are, again, a couple more complexities to parameter mode, which I will cover in another tutorial, but basically each parameter has a smoothing filter that is attached to it. This smoothing filter determines whether this parameter is going to respond to modulation and automation with complete 100% sample accuracy, or whether it's going to be sort of slowed down and smoothed out a little bit. Okay, so this is something that you can set for each parameter, and I will cover that later. The next mode that we need to get into is modulation mode, and yeah, I think that this is a good instrument to use for demonstration. You can see that we have a filter here, and that this filter is somehow attached to this envelope module. Now, an envelope module is a modulator. If I double click on it, it calls up an editor, which shows a curve displayed inside of it. Alright, now when we switch to modulation mode, we can see that the red output from this envelope is connected to one of the handles of this filter module. This filter is the pitch handle, or sorry, this handle is the pitch handle, and it controls the cutoff frequency of this filter. So what this means is that by connecting these, and I'll just disconnect it to demonstrate, by connecting them back together, what's happening is that this filter's cutoff is being modulated by this curve. So if I change the curve, then I change the characteristic of the filter. Alright, so let's cover the operation of AudioGL's timeline while we're here. To move the timeline back and forth, you move it back and forth after left clicking, and if you want to zoom in and zoom out, then you can left click and go up and down. Alright, setting the left locator is a left double click, setting the right locator is a right double click, and since we're in the envelope editor, I can actually turn on the loop mode button, and it is going to loop between this highlighted section. Alright, so that general idea actually copies over to the overall timeline for your track. It uses the same navigation system. Okay, pretty straightforward stuff. And I know I'm not really demonstrating this in a linear manner, but while we're on the subject of modulation, let's just show you how to get into the envelope editor. There are two ways to do it. In module mode, you just double click on an envelope. In parameter mode, you click on this little button over here. Okay. If you just want to start playing around with modulation mode, you would just take this envelope output and start connecting it to a whole bunch of random stuff, and that's going to sound a little bit strange. Alright, so there's really no end to what you can do there. And I'm going to delete these connections just by holding down Control-Alt, click. There we go. Alright, So we've covered instrument mode, module mode, parameter mode, and modulation mode. There's only one left, and that is the edit page mode. Now with edit page mode, what you can do is you can take various aspects of a track and you can start assembling them together into one place. So the track that I'm working on right now, it doesn't have any automation lanes and it doesn't have any sequencer lanes either. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to load up a project that comes with the software. Going File, Open, and my apologies, but you cannot see the actual file menu. I'm just loading up a track which is called vid2_intro. So this is a track that I made ages ago for a demonstration video. It sounds like this. Okay, so I don't know whether I would really call that music or not, but it definitely sounds like something. And you can see that in the edit pages I have a list on the side here of different edit pages which contain different sequences and different automation lanes. Okay, so you can see that we have this sound here, and I have its sequencer, and I also have all of the relevant automation that goes along with this sound. Now if I wanted to make an automation lane like this, or sorry, if I wanted to make an edit page like this, what I would do is I would switch back to parameter mode. I could either use this cursor, or again I could just hold down Alt and then click on all of the things that I want to put into an edit page. Okay, and you can see that they're getting highlighted as I click on them. And after I've selected everything that I want, I would then click on this button which says Create Edit Page from Selected Automation Lanes. Okay, so let's do that. And there we go. So it needs a little bit of resizing, and you can go up and down here just using your scroll wheel, zoom in, zoom out, and you can see that all of that automation that I had selected and the sequencer that I had selected, they're all put into one place. And I can even do multi-lane editing in here. So if you want to select a whole bunch of stuff, then it's just Control-C to copy, reposition the timeline, and Control-V to paste. There we go. You can also rename the edit page, name, alright, and essentially this just gives you a way of organizing the various aspects of your track. So with each one of these, again, I have a sequencer and I have the relevant automation below. Okay, now I haven't covered sequencing just yet, and I haven't covered automation editing. I'm going to leave these for a future tutorial, but I think that this video gives you a pretty good basic understanding of the software. It should be enough to get you started, so thanks for watching, and if you want to see more videos, you should probably subscribe to this YouTube channel.